And what if I told you there's a way to make your mind so cold, so impenetrable, that neither betrayals, rejections, nor humiliations would be able to shake you? In this video, you will uncover the psychological secrets Machiavelli never said out loud. Mental power strategies that build a fortress within you. But beware, once you see this, you will never be the same again. We live in a world where everyone has access to your mind. A look, a word, a critique, and that's it. You fall apart. Machiavelli saw this as weakness, as a crack in the castle of your soul. But what if you could close all those doors? What if you could become the kind of man no one dares to manipulate, no one can read, and not even chaos can bend? If topics like psychology, philosophy, and the darkness of the human soul interest you, subscribe to the channel now. There is a lie that repeats on every corner, whispered by voices disguised as advice, empathy, and good intentions. A lie you've likely heard your whole life. Being vulnerable is being strong. That is the modern poison. Disguised as emotional wisdom, it invites you to undress before the world, to hand your open heart to people who don't even deserve your trust. And then you wonder why you are always hurt, why everything affects you, why any word pierces your chest like a spear. Machiavelli would never call this strength. He would call it weakness disguised as virtue. The real world, the world Machiavelli observed with surgical eyes, does not reward the fragile. It tests, provokes, wounds, and despises those who show their jugular too soon. The prince, to maintain his power, could not afford emotional reactions. He needed to observe everything, feel little, and demonstrate even less. Coldness was not cruelty, but strategic self-defense. And here is the brutal truth. The more you believe you need to express everything, the more control you give to others. Because what you expose can be used against you. The lie of unconditional vulnerability makes you a hostage to others' judgment. When you depend on external validation to legitimize your pain, you become predictable. And the predictable is manipulable. You become an emotional puppet, easily disturbed, easily seduced, easily broken. Machiavelli warned against this. A leader, a strong man, must appear human, but inside he must be made of stone. He must master his emotions as a general commands his soldiers, with discipline, clarity, and surgical coldness. Do not confuse this with apathy. Machiavelli did not advocate coldness as an absence of feeling, but as a weapon of internal control. He knew emotions are inevitable, but giving in to them is optional. And that choice defines who commands and who is commanded. You can feel anger, pain, desire, but you must never act in the heat of impulse. Because it is precisely in that moment, when you explode, cry, beg, or attack, that others see your weaknesses. And a smart enemy, or even a friend with hidden intentions, will use that as a map to destroy you. Therefore, the first step so that nothing and no one affects you again is to undo that lie. Reject the illusion that being emotionally transparent is a virtue. It is not. It is exposure. And exposure is risk. True power begins in silence. When you observe without reacting, feel without showing, and keep your mind intact, even while the world tries to destabilize you, you stop being an emotional pawn and become a fortress. A presence that intimidates. A soul that cannot be touched because it has already understood that true protection begins from the inside out. Now that you've seen the lie that was weakening you, it's time to build something no one can take away from you. The inner fortress. It's not about visible walls or iron bars. It's about a state of consciousness, an unshakable core that resides within those who have learned to master themselves. While others build castles on appearances, on status, likes, approvals, you will raise something far more dangerous. A temple of silence and invisible power. And this begins with a decision. The decision to never again depend emotionally on anyone. Machiavelli knew that the prince who most threatens his enemies is not the one who shouts, but the one who observes, who is silent, who does not flinch even under attack. That is the essence of the inner fortress. It is born when you realize that no offense has real power over you unless you choose to carry it. When someone tries to humiliate, manipulate, or provoke you, they are actually throwing stones at a wall, and the wall feels no pain. It simply remains cold, firm, unmoving, because it is not there to please. It is there to protect. The greatest weakness of the modern man is his reactivity. He reacts to everything: comments, looks, rejection, silence. But the strong man does not react. He filters, he weighs, he decides. The secret of the inner fortress lies in not allowing others' emotions to dictate your actions. It is not coldness out of pride. It is coldness for clarity, because he who lives reacting to the world never lives for himself. He's like a leaf in the wind, tossed around by the moods and whims of those around him. Machiavelli would call this emotional slavery, and there is no power possible in that state. Building this fortress requires symbolic isolation. It doesn't mean cutting off all people, but cutting off the dependency on their opinions. It means looking inward with brutal honesty and asking, what destabilizes me? And then working there, at that exact point, polishing yourself. Training your mind like a warrior trains his body, with repetition, with discipline, with the confrontation of pain. You don't need the world to be kind. You need your mind not to be shaken, even when the world is cruel. True strength is not in controlling others, but in becoming unshakable. And here is the final key. Your inner fortress cannot depend on motivation, praise, or recognition. It feeds on solitude, sobriety, and strategy. It is the result of silent nights facing your weaknesses without running, without distractions, without anesthesia, because every man who is free inside frightens. He emits an energy that cannot be dominated. He enters a room and alters the atmosphere, because he carries something no one can see, but everyone feels, a strength that does not seek applause, only respect. And if not respect, then distance, but never submission. The man who reacts is a slave. Slave to opinion, to offense, to glances, to memories. He lives like a puppet in the invisible hands of those who know exactly which buttons to press. His face reveals everything. His posture betrays him. His voice trembles. His energy gives in before he even speaks a word. He doesn't realize it, but he is an open book to those who master the game. With every defensive sigh, every impulsive reply, he says, "You control me." The death of reaction is not artificial coldness. It is the deepest liberation a man can achieve. Because as long as you react, you are on a leash. Reacting is being predictable, and the predictable is controllable. When you are easily offended, when you respond in the heat of the moment, when you bite emotional bait thrown by those trying to destabilize you, you hand over the map of your emotional system. You tell the world, "Here I am vulnerable." And the world, especially the world of power, does not forgive that exposure. Machiavelli taught that a leader should be like the lion in strength, but like the fox in cunning. The fox does not react to noise. It observes. It waits. It only moves when the move is fatal. To master oneself is to be that fox. Let them talk, provoke, try to hurt, and remain unreachable, like a shadow silently watching others despair. The death of reaction begins with an internal act, the suspension of immediate judgment. When something hits you, your mind wants to label it as attack, betrayal, disrespect. But the trained man resists the impulse. He holds the sword of emotion before it cuts. He sees the facts as if they were not personal, as if the pain were a passing mist, and he, a mountain that does not move. This coldness is not lack of feeling. It is emotional intelligence elevated to its purest form, the ability to choose when and how to respond, instead of being dragged by the whirlwind. The man who masters this art turns every provocation attempt into fuel for his own solidity. For that, silence is your weapon. Not the passive silence of fear, but the strategic silence of the warrior who chooses the field and time of battle. He who does not react observes more, and he who observes more understands, and he who understands manipulates if he wishes. Absolute self-control is perceived as raw power because it is rare, because it is threatening, because it confuses the weak who expected a fight, a rant, an emotional reaction that would validate their own mediocrity. But you give the opposite, an impenetrable void. They cannot read you, cannot affect you, cannot bend you. And then they retreat, because the unpredictable is dangerous. And the man who kills his own reaction becomes unpredictable. When you stop reacting, you'll notice something strange. The world starts to respect you more, not because they became better, but because they sensed that something in you changed. Your energy no longer begs, does not seek attention, does not justify itself. It simply exists, and whoever wants to deal with it will have to rise to its level. The death of reaction is not the end of feeling. It is the birth of inner sovereignty. When you do not react, you become the cause, not the effect. You stop being a victim of emotion and become its master. And in this world, where everyone lives inflamed, unstable, desperate for a response, the man who does not react becomes king. Indifference is not coldness. It is power. It is the art of not handing over your inner world to the hungry eyes of those who wish to control it. Machiavelli understood this. He knew that the more you show, the more you expose yourself, and the more you expose yourself, the more vulnerable you become. In a game of power, even a sigh can be interpreted as weakness. That is why true strategists build an invisible shield within themselves. Calculated indifference. It is not apathy. It is tactical silence. A presence that observes without reacting, and for that reason, dominates. When you are indifferent, you confuse. You disarm. Those who try to provoke you find only the emptiness of your emotional absence. They speak, they shout, they accuse, they test, but you do not respond as they expect. This destabilizes them because they are used to controlling others through emotion. But you, by becoming indifferent, break the game. You do not respond with anger. You do not justify yourself. You do not seek approval. You observe and hold silence. And in that silence lives your strength. Because now, the one who reacts is the other. True indifference is born from the recognition that not every attack deserves a war. You learn to choose your battles with the precision of a general. You are not moved by impulse, but by strategy. And this requires absolute control over your own ego. Because the ego wants to be validated, defended, exalted. But the indifferent spirit already understands. The best response to disrespect is disdain, absence, the refusal to participate in the other's emotional theater. There is a kind of indifference that hurts more than any response. It is the one that makes it clear that you do not need anyone to feel whole. That no criticism, no rejection, no abandonment touches the core of your essence. When you reach this level of self-containment, manipulators flee. They do not know what to do with someone who does not bleed emotionally. Your stability becomes a threat. Your calm becomes a weapon. You become what they fear the most, a human being who can no longer be affected. That is why indifference is not just a shield, it is a symbol, a silent declaration of sovereignty over oneself. It says, "Nothing you do forces me to come down to your level." And that is the greatest form of superiority a man can achieve. When you do not care, not out of pride, but out of wisdom, you assume absolute control over your psyche. And in that moment, the external world loses the power to define your worth. There's a game that everyone is playing, but almost no one admits it. It is the game of appearances, of emotional control, of subtle manipulation. You have played it since you learned to smile when you were angry, to say, "I'm fine," when you wanted to scream, to give in out of fear of rejection. This game has silent rules. Never seem weak, never show you care more than the other, never reveal your true inner state. Machiavelli, in observing men, noted that power rarely belongs to those who are sincere, but rather to those who understand the masks. In this social theater, the winner is not the kindest, but the most lucid. And the first clarity is this: everyone is playing, even you. Most play to survive, but the strong play to dominate. They know that behind every word lies an unspoken intention, that most people do not want truth. They want control. Emotional, social, psychological control. That is why those who overreact give themselves away quickly. Those who need to be understood lose ground. The secret is to learn to see the game without being swallowed by it. You observe the patterns, you listen to the tone, you analyze the subtext, but you never reveal your board. You smile, but your mind is silent. They think you gave in, but you simply saw beyond. This game is everywhere, on social media, in relationships, at work, even in spirituality. It is the game of comparison, of image, of validation. You are constantly tested, not with direct questions, but with emotional provocations. They want to know if you are easy to manipulate, if you need approval, if your ego is hungry. And every reaction of yours gives away a piece of your inner game. That is why the wise choose non-reaction, neutrality. They prefer to be underestimated, because that makes them dangerous. Machiavelli knew that the man who knows the game, but does not depend on it, is the most dangerous of all. He plays, but he is not played. He uses silence as a sword and presence as armor. He is not in a hurry to respond, does not beg for attention, does not compete for affection. He has already won internally, and because of that, he is immune to external pressures. While others twist themselves to maintain an image, he keeps his essence. And it is that essence that silently elevates him above the ordinary players. The game everyone plays has only one master, the one who no longer needs to win to be free. He plays with awareness, not with need. He does not act out of desperation, but out of strategy. And when necessary, he simply leaves the board. Because true power is not in defeating others, but in no longer being vulnerable to the rules that enslave the weak. This is the peak of emotional immunity, being the one who sees, understands, and masters the game, but never forgets that his value is not in the chips others hand out, but in the steady hand with which he chooses to play them or let them fall. In a world obsessed with attention, noise, and exposure, silence has become the last form of rebellion. Everyone wants to be heard, validated, followed. Everyone screams desperately to prove they exist. But the truly powerful man does not need to make noise. His silence is louder than any voice, because he has learned that talking too much is revealing weakness, is opening the soul to the judgment of fools. And in the game of power, those who reveal too much lose control. Silence, then, is his invisible armor. It is his way of saying, "I know, but I do not need to prove anything." Machiavelli already warned, the less you express, the more others project. Silence is a mirror. It forces the other to face themselves. When you are silent, you force others to fill the void with their own fears, insecurities, and desires. Silence intimidates because it creates mystery, and mystery is power. A man who speaks little but observes everything becomes unpredictable, and the unpredictable is feared. While the world rushes to explain itself, to justify itself, the strategist remains quiet, because he understands that true mastery is not in imposing with words, but in being impossible to decipher. Besides that, silence preserves psychic energy. Speaking is spending. Defending oneself is exhausting. And every time you try to justify yourself to someone, you put yourself in an inferior position. You prove that the other has power over your perception, that your image depends on external approval. Silence breaks that cycle. It communicates detachment. It shows that you are at peace with your truth, and that there is nothing that needs to be said, because your existence is self-evident. The silent man is not trying to be understood. He is busy being free. But do not be mistaken. Silence is not passivity. It is strategy. It is the pause before the strike. It is the fertile ground where you plant doubt in your enemies and confidence in yourself. Many times, the most powerful response you can give is none, because the emptiness your silence creates speaks more forcefully than arguments. It disarms, unsettles, paralyzes. People expect reactions. They expect drama, crying, shouting, confrontation. When you give silence, you give the unexpected. And that is devastating. Finally, silence is the space where you hear yourself. It is in the absence of external noise that the voice of the soul is heard. The man who masters silence not only controls others, he understands himself. He strengthens himself, because while the world screams, he plans. While the world exposes itself, he rebuilds. And when he finally decides to speak, his words carry the weight of 1,000 silences, and no one dares to ignore them. He enters any place and everyone feels it. Even before he speaks, the atmosphere has already changed. The air becomes denser, eyes turn, words hesitate. And it is not because he imposes himself with brute force, display, or shouting. It is because he carries a presence born from introspection, from pain that was not dramatized, from power that was cultivated in silence. He is the silent king, the man who governs without needing to dominate, who inspires respect without demanding obedience. His strength is not in the noise he makes, but in what he can provoke without saying a single word. The silent king understands something that most never did. That true power does not need to be announced. That shouting is the song of the insecure. That the more one speaks, the less one observes. And the less one observes, the more mistakes are made. While fools rush to be heard, he listens. While the weak seek attention, he becomes inaccessible. His absence is more impactful than the presence of others. And that is exactly what makes him uncontrollable. He knows that whoever needs an audience to exist is always in the hands of the public. But he reigns in the silence of his own inner world. Unlike the hysterical tyrant, the silent king governs with emotional coldness. He does not react. He calculates. He does not argue with enemies, does not justify himself to strangers, does not despair of being understood. Because he is not moved by the desire for approval, but by clarity of purpose. He knows his shadows, his wounds, and his impulses, and exactly for that reason, he is no longer a slave to them. His calm unsettles, because in an emotionally unstable world, the man who remains unshaken becomes an almost mythological figure. He is stone in the middle of the storm, motionless, unbreakable. But do not mistake his serenity for passivity. The silent king knows exactly when to speak, when to act, when to strike. His silence is not escape. It is containment. It is absolute mastery of will. He does not act on impulse, but with precision. And when he decides to speak, every word is like a sword that cuts deep, because it carries the weight of the silence that preceded it. People listen not because he shouts, but because he rarely speaks. And that rarity turns his voice into law, his gesture into command, his absence into punishment. The silent king does not seek to be loved. He seeks to be free. And freedom demands discipline, self-control, and a confidence that does not depend on external gazes. He is the archetype of the final man, the result of the death of fragility and the birth of unshakable presence. He does not bow to society because he built his own throne. An invisible throne seated upon silence, sustained by self-mastery, protected by indifference. He reigns without saying he reigns. He dominates because he does not need to prove that he dominates. And in this chaotic world, his silence is the most powerful scream of all. There is a silent, almost mystical moment when a man looks into the abyss and understands that no one will come to rescue him. There's no father, there is no God, there is no system that will save him from himself. In this brutal moment of lucidity, a choice is born. Either he kneels before chaos or he makes a pact, the pact with sovereignty. This pact is not signed with ink, but with renunciations. Renunciation of victimhood, of neediness, of the need to be understood, of the childish desire for external salvation. It is the moment when the man chooses to be king of his own hell instead of a servant in someone else's paradise. Making this pact is killing the inner boy who waits for permission to exist. It is silencing the inner voice that begs for comfort and warmth and replacing it with a command: stand up. Now you are responsible. Sovereignty is not chaotic freedom. It is discipline imposed by oneself. The inner sovereign is the one who says no to temptations that promise immediate pleasure, and yes to decisions that build greatness in the long term. He knows there is no honor without sacrifice, that the price of sovereignty is solitude. But he also knows that this solitude is the cradle of authenticity. Most run from this pact because it demands pain, silence, responsibility. It demands killing the identity built to please others and building a new one made of integrity, principles, and direction. The sovereign is not someone who controls others. He is someone who does not need to be controlled by anyone. His mind is his law. His conscience is his judge. He decides what he thinks, what he feels, how he acts. And if he makes a mistake, he does not hide. He corrects. He does not seek excuses. He seeks the truth. He does not outsource his misery. He transforms it into power. He does not beg. He builds. But there is an important detail. This pact is silent, invisible. It is not announced. It is not flaunted. It is not displayed. The true sovereign does not shout that he is free. He lives like someone who cannot be imprisoned. He does not take pride in being strong. He simply does not break. The pact with sovereignty is a secret kept in the soul, an agreement between the man and his destiny, far from the eyes of the world. And exactly because of that, he's indestructible. Because everything the world can take away has already been abandoned by him before it was even offered. In the end, the pact with sovereignty does not guarantee comfort, applause, or belonging. It guarantees only one thing: that when everything collapses outside, you will still be standing inside. It guarantees that even surrounded by chaos, cowards, and frauds, you will be in inviolable territory. And that is more precious than any external throne, because the one who is sovereign over himself has already defeated the only enemy that matters, the one who lives inside his own mind. If you have made it this far, you are no longer the same man who started this video. You have glimpsed the darkness, faced your masks, killed your weakness, and made a silent pact with your own greatness. Now, one choice remains. Return to the world and get lost in the voices of others, or build your inner fortress where no one will ever be able to touch. If you are ready to continue this journey of psychological power, emotional control, and absolute self-mastery, subscribe now, because the next chapters are not for just anyone. They are for kings. Some think this was the end. But be careful. The war is not over yet. there are still things that have not been said. These two videos in front of you are not here by chance. And what if everything you believe about yourself is just a reflection of someone else's gaze? Click now on one of the videos beside you and start breaking that mirror. You will have to take the risk of clicking. So, which one will you choose?